When the demolition notice was posted on the Majestic Theater's doors, I had exactly 43 days to save the building where my grandmother once performed for presidents. The developer who bought it had already ordered the wrecking balls. What he hadn't counted on was that I had inherited more than just my grandmother's stubbornness. I had her secret journals too. My name is Eliza Montgomery, and until that cold Tuesday morning in October, I had been a quietly frustrated architectural preservationist at a firm that specialized in converting historic buildings into luxury condominiums. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood in the rain, staring at the demolition notice through the foggy lenses of my glasses. The Majestic had seen better days. Its once grand marquee now missing letters. Its Art Deco facade dulled by decades of city grime. But beneath the neglect lay architectural and cultural significance that couldn't be measured in square footage or potential rental income. "It's really happening then," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Morris Abernethy, the theater's caretaker for the past 30 years, his weathered face a map of resignation. 43 days, I said, tapping the notice. That's how long we have before Davidson Development can legally start demolition. Morris shook his head. Won't matter. City Council already approved the permit. Historical Preservation Board voted against landmark status last month. Nobody cares about old theaters anymore, Miss Montgomery. I care, I said, my voice sharper than intended. And it's not just about the architecture. This place matters, Morris. To you and me, sure. To your grandmother's memory. But to Richard Davidson, it's just prime real estate for his next luxury tower. Richard Davidson. Even the name made my stomach tighten. Third-generation developer, known for acquiring historic properties at bargain prices and replacing them with steel and glass monuments to wealth. His company's slogan, "Building Tomorrow by Reimagining Today," was plastered across construction sites throughout the city. "Can I go inside?" I asked Morris. One more time. He hesitated, then pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "I'm still employed for another month. Guess they figured someone needs to make sure the copper pipes don't get stolen before demolition." He selected a large brass key. "Take all the time you need." The Majestic's lobby still retained echoes of its 1920s grandeur, soaring ceilings with intricate plasterwork, marble columns, and a sweeping staircase that had once been traversed by the most celebrated performers of the 20th century. My grandmother, Sophia Montgomery, had been among them. From the 1940s through the 1960s, Sophia Montgomery had been one of America's most beloved stage actresses. She performed Shakespeare for President Kennedy, starred in Broadway hits, and turned down Hollywood repeatedly, claiming that true acting could only happen in the electric space between performer and audience. The Majestic had been her favorite venue. "It's got perfect acoustics and better ghosts," she used to tell me during my childhood visits to her Manhattan apartment. "A theater needs good ghosts, Eliza. They're the ones who really know if you're acting truthfully." I made my way through the lobby to the auditorium doors. They opened with a familiar creak, revealing the vast space beyond minus 1,200 seats arranged in orchestra and 2 balcony levels, all facing the proscenium stage where my grandmother had delivered Juliet's balcony monologue, Lady Macbeth's madness, and countless other iconic performances. Despite the dust and disrepair, the theater still possessed a magnetic presence. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The stage was bare except for a single ghost light, the theatrical tradition of leaving one light burning when a theater is dark. "For safety," they said. "For the ghosts," superstition whispered. I climbed the side stairs to the stage, standing center where my grandmother had stood countless times. Above me loomed the fly system with its complex reading, below me the trapdoors leading to a warren of understage passages. Behind me stretched the backstage area, dressing rooms, and production offices. One of those offices had belonged to Anton Lenkov, the Majestic's legendary artistic director from 1938 to 1972, and though few people knew it, my grandmother's lover for much of that time. My grandfather, the respected banker everyone assumed was Sophia's one true love, had been more of a business arrangement, a public face for a woman who couldn't afford scandal in her era. The truth lived in Sophia's journals, which she had left to me upon her death 15 years ago, extracting a promise that I wouldn't read them until I turned 30. I had honored that promise, only opening the locked box of leather-bound volumes on my 30th birthday 3 years ago. Inside, I discovered not just the secret history of my grandmother's life, but potentially, I now realize, the key to saving the Majestic. "Miss Montgomery?" Morris called from the back of the auditorium. "I hate to rush you, but I've got a meeting with the Davidson people in an hour." "Thanks, Morris. Just a few more minutes." I walked to the back of the stage, through the curtains to the backstage area. Though I had visited the theater many times as a child when my grandmother had returned for special performances or fundraisers, there was one place I had never been: Anton Linkov's private office. According to Sophia's journals, it had remained largely untouched after his death, preserved first out of respect, then forgotten in the theater's gradual decline. Following the detailed descriptions from the journals, I navigated the backstage maze until I found a narrow staircase leading to a small upper level. At the end of a short hallway stood a door with peeling gold letters: A. Lenkov, Artistic Director. It was locked, of course. I removed a small leather case from my bag, a gift from my grandmother on my 21st birthday. "Every lady should know how to pick a lock," she'd said with a wink. "You never know when you'll need to make a dramatic entrance. Or exit," I thought, as I worked on the old lock until it clicked open. The office was smaller than I had imagined and thick with dust. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the windows, and the air had the stillness of a room unopened for decades. Bookcases lined the walls, filled with play scripts, theatrical reference books, and framed photographs. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface buried under yellowing papers and production notes. I didn't have time to examine everything. According to Sophia's journal entries from 1963, what I needed would be hidden behind a specific book on the third shelf, a first edition copy of Stanislavski's An Actor Prepares. I found it exactly where she had described, and when I pulled it from the shelf, I heard a soft click. A small section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a hidden safe. The combination was my grandmother's birthday, spelled out numerically. The heavy door swung open to reveal several bundles of letters, a small jewelry box, and a thick manila envelope. I took only the envelope, carefully closing the safe and replacing the book. What I needed wouldn't be in the love letters or jewelry Anton had gifted Sophia over their decades-long relationship. No, what I needed was in that envelope. Documents that Sophia had alluded to in her most cryptic journal entries. Documents that Anton had kept hidden in case the wolves ever came for the theater, as she had written. Back outside in the crisp autumn air, I ducked into a coffee shop across from the theater and opened the envelope. Inside were original architectural plans, correspondence with the city dating back to 1927, and most importantly, legal documents pertaining to the theater's construction and the land it stood on. Among them was a covenant signed by the original landowner, stipulating that the property could only be used for cultural and artistic purposes benefiting the public good for a period of 100 years from the date of the theater's opening. The Majestic had opened its doors on February 14, 1927. The covenant was valid for another 16 months. I immediately called my former professor from preservation law, Victoria Chen, now a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms. "Eliza, it's been ages," she answered warmly. "How are you?" "I need your help, Victoria. I found something that might save the Majestic Theater." 2 hours later, I sat in Victoria's office on the 30th floor of a midtown skyscraper, watching her face as she examined the documents. "This covenant appears legitimate," she said finally, looking up at me. "But Davidson Development employs over 20 lawyers. They'll fight this with everything they have. Can they win?" She tapped her pen against the desk. "Honestly, maybe. These restrictive covenants can sometimes be overturned, especially when the original parties are deceased and the property has changed hands multiple times. They'll argue that conditions have changed, that the covenant no longer serves its original purpose. But we have a chance." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Yes, we have a chance. Especially if we can rally public support. Real estate developers hate bad publicity." "Then let's give them some," I said. The next morning, I resigned from my position at the architectural firm. By afternoon, I had established Save the Majestic social media accounts and reached out to every preservationist, theater historian, and cultural journalist in my network. 3 days later, I stood on the steps of the Majestic as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward me. Behind me stood a group of allies I had hastily assembled: theater professionals, preservationists, community activists, and most powerfully, several legendary actors who had performed at the Majestic during its heyday. The Majestic isn't just a building, I told the gathered press. It's a living piece of our cultural heritage, and now we discovered that its destruction would not only be a tremendous loss to our city, but would violate a legally binding covenant protecting this site. I held up copies of the documents. Davidson Development was either unaware of or chose to ignore this covenant when they purchased the property. Either way, we intend to ensure it's enforced. The story caught fire faster than I had dared hope. By nightfall, it had made national news. #SaveTheMajestic was trending on social media, with celebrities and theater lovers worldwide sharing memories and photographs of performances at the historic venue. Richard Davidson issued a terse statement claiming that his legal team was examining the validity of recently discovered documents, but remained committed to bringing much-needed housing and retail space to the area. What happened next was the first surprise in a series of events I couldn't have scripted better myself. An anonymous source leaked emails from within Davidson Development revealing that they had, in fact, been aware of the covenant but had proceeded with purchase plans anyway, confident they could overturn it through legal maneuvering. The public outrage was immediate and fierce. Protesters gathered outside Davidson headquarters. Investors began questioning the company's tactics. The mayor, initially supportive of the development project, called for a review of the demolition permit. 10 days into our campaign, as I was giving an interview on the theater's steps, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Richard Davidson himself emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. "Ms. Montgomery," he called out, ignoring the reporters who swiveled to capture this unexpected confrontation. "A word, if you please." Against the whispered advice of my impromptu PR team, I approached him. Up close, Davidson was older than he appeared in corporate photographs, with lines of stress etched around his mouth and eyes. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his voice low. "The covenant caused the stir, Mr. Davidson. I just brought it to light." He glanced at the cameras watching us from a distance. "Why don't we discuss this privately?" Inside the theater lobby, Davidson looked around with the calculating gaze of a man who saw square footage and potential return on investment rather than history or beauty. "I'll be direct, Ms. Montgomery. We're prepared to offer a compromise. We'll preserve the facade of the theater and incorporate a small performance space in the base of the new building. In return, you drop this covenant claim and publicly support the revised project." I laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "That's not a compromise, Mr. Davidson. That's a consolation prize designed to make your company look benevolent while you destroy everything that matters about this place." His expression hardened. "Be reasonable. The economics don't work for preserving a 1,200-seat theater that sits empty most of the year. The land alone is worth—" "I know exactly what it's worth," I interrupted. "But I also know what it's worth isn't measured solely in dollars. This theater was built to last centuries, not to be demolished after 9 decades because a developer wants to maximize profit margins." Davidson straightened his already perfect tie. "My lawyers are confident we can have this covenant invalidated." "Perhaps. But are you prepared for the months, possibly years, of litigation? The protests? The damage to your company's reputation while we fight this in court and the court of public opinion?" I stepped closer. "Did you know my grandmother was Sophia Montgomery?" A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "She performed here for decades," I continued. "She knew every inch of this building, every secret it held, including this covenant. She made sure I would find it when the time came." "What do you want?" Davidson asked finally. "I want you to sell the theater to a nonprofit preservation trust. At the price you paid for it, no profit." He laughed sharply. "Impossible." "Then I'll see you in court, Mr. Davidson. And every day we're in court, there will be protesters outside your sales offices, investors questioning your judgment, and the public watching a David versus Goliath story unfold, with you cast as Goliath." 2 weeks later, Davidson Development announced they were selling the Majestic Theater to the newly formed Montgomery Theater Trust for Historic Preservation, at cost. The press release cited the company's commitment to finding balanced solutions that honor our city's cultural heritage while addressing modern needs. Translation: They had calculated the cost of fighting and determined it wasn't worth the battle. The real work began after the victory headlines faded. Saving a theater from demolition was one thing. Restoring it to operational glory and financial sustainability was another challenge entirely. The theater needed millions in renovations, a viable business model, and programming that would attract modern audiences while honoring its historic significance. I had been prepared to spend years fundraising, applying for grants, and gradually restoring the venue. What I hadn't anticipated was the call from Jameson Hayes, the reclusive billionaire whose mother had been a costume designer at the Majestic during the 1950s. "I've been following your campaign," he said when I answered the unknown number. "You've done what everyone said was impossible." "We've only won the first act," I replied. "Restoration and sustainability are the next challenge. That's why I'm calling. I'd like to establish an endowment for the theater's restoration and ongoing operations. $50 million to start." I nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Hayes, that's extraordinary. The Majestic gave my mother her start when no one else would hire a woman in technical theater. It's time to return the favor." He paused. "There's one condition." Of course there was a condition. There always was. The theater must be restored not just as a museum piece, but as a working venue that trains and employs the next generation of theater professionals. I don't want a pristine relic. I want a living, breathing cultural space that does for young artists today what it did for my mother 60 years ago. It was exactly what I had hoped for but hadn't dared articulate fully. Not just preservation of a building, but preservation of a mission, a purpose, a cultural contribution that would extend into the future. If you like this story, please comment for next part.